The moment I saw the body, I knew this case was different. Sure, I've seen enough blood and carnage to fill a lifetime, but the symbols carved into this victim's skin told me something far darker was at play. I crouched beside the body, a young woman, no older than 20, her lifeless eyes staring up at the overcast sky. The way her arms were splayed out, her torso bared and marred with intricate demonic runes. It wasn't random. Someone had done this with purpose. "Ethan, this isn't just a murder. It's a message," Maeve said, her voice steady, though I could hear the unease beneath her words. She stood a few feet behind me, arms crossed, her pale face illuminated by the fading light. There was always something about her, like she was connected to things I couldn't quite understand. And that was saying something, given my history with the occult. "I know," I muttered, my fingers tracing one of the marks. "I've seen this before." Maeve moved closer, her boots crunching on the gravel. "Where?" I hesitated. The truth was, I didn't like thinking about where I'd seen it before. That case, my first real encounter with the supernatural, had ended badly, but I couldn't avoid it now. A few years back, different town, different victim, but the same symbols. It's tied to Azrael. Maeve's expression hardened. "Azrael? The demon lord?" I nodded, standing up and brushing the dirt off my jeans. "Yeah, someone's trying to summon him." The air around us suddenly felt thicker, as if the trees were listening in, waiting for something. I glanced around, scanning the darkening woods that encircled us. This town, Black Hollow, was small and quiet, and nothing ever happened until now. The murders had started 2 weeks ago. At first, I thought it was just a string of coincidences, but now, standing here, seeing this, it was no coincidence. Someone was bringing hell to this town, literally. "We need to stop it," Maeve said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "If Azrael is involved, we're in over our heads." "I've been over my head for a while," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "Doesn't mean we back down." I turned to face her fully. Maeve wasn't just any partner. She was a witch, one of the last of her kind, from what she'd told me. Her magic had saved us more times than I could count, but even she had limits, and when demons were involved, those limits were tested. "We're gonna need help," I said, shaking my head as I looked back at the body. "And I know just the guy, but you're not gonna like him." Maeve raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement crossing her face. "Who?" "A half-demon named Nico. He's got ties to the underworld. If anyone knows what's happening, it's him." Maeve's face shifted from amusement to suspicion. "Half-demon?" I shrugged. "He's more of an informant than anything. He owes me." She crossed her arms, considering it. "Fine, let's go." As we made our way back to town, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking straight into a nightmare. I've seen what demons can do, what they can turn people into. And Azrael? He wasn't just any demon. He was one of the most powerful beings from the underworld. If someone succeeded in bringing him back, it wouldn't just be Black Hollow that suffered. It'd be the world. The bar Nico hung around was a dive, even by Black Hollow's low standards. A few locals nursed their drinks in dark corners, trying to stay out of sight. Places like this were perfect for guys like Nico, people with too many secrets and few morals. I pushed the door open, the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke hitting me like a wall. There, in the far corner, sat Nico. He was hard to miss, with his tousled black hair, sharp features, and those unnerving red eyes. Half demon, through and through. "Nico," I called as I made my way over, Maeve just behind me. He glanced up, his red eyes flickering with recognition, and, was that annoyance? "Cross, thought I'd gotten rid of you." "Yeah, well, I'm hard to shake," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. Maeve stood near the bar, keeping a watchful eye on the place. Nico leaned back, lighting a cigarette with a flick of his finger. One of the perks of being half-demon, I guess. "So what brings you to this fine establishment? You're not exactly the social type." I cut to the chase. "There's a demon summoning happening in town. People are dying, and the name Azrael came up." Nico froze, the cigarette halfway to his lips. His eyes darkened, and he didn't say anything for a moment. Then, slowly, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Azrael? You're sure?" "Dead, sure," I replied. "We've already found 3 bodies, all marked with his symbols." Nico cursed under his breath, crushing the cigarette into the ashtray. "You're in deep shit, Cross. Azrael's no joke." "You think I don't know that?" I snapped, trying to keep my frustration in check. That's why I'm here. I need to know what you know. Nico ran a hand through his hair, clearly unsettled. Azrael, he's one of the old ones. If someone's trying to bring him back, it's bad news for everyone. Who would be dumb enough to try? I asked, leaning in. Nico shook his head. Could be anyone. Some old covens still worship him. Or it could be a rogue summoner looking for power. It could be one of Azrael's descendants trying to make their mark. We don't have time for guesses, I said, my patience thin. What do you know about the ritual? Nico sighed, rubbing his temples. The ritual to summon Azrael isn't something you can just stumble upon. It requires a lot of blood, multiple sacrifices. The more souls taken, the stronger the summoning. The bodies you're finding? They're just the beginning. Whoever's doing this needs much more blood before they can finish. Maeve, who had been listening quietly from the bar, stepped forward. Is there a way to stop it? Nico looked up at her, his red eyes locking with hers. You can try to break the ritual, but once it's started, it's almost impossible to stop. Azrael's power, it seeps into everything, warps reality. If you get too close, it'll mess with your head. It makes you see things, hear things, turn on the people you trust. Great, just what we needed. We have to try, I said firmly. I've seen what Azrael can do. We're not letting him come back. Nico gave me a long, hard look. You think you can handle this, Cross? You're dealing with a force older than time. Azrael's not like the low-level demons you faced before. He'll chew you up and spit you out. I don't have a choice, I replied, standing up from the booth. We stop this, or we die trying. Nico nodded, his expression grim. Just be careful. Azrael's influence is already spreading. If you're not careful, you'll lose more than just your life. We left the bar with more questions than answers, but I'd expected that. Nico was right about one thing. We were in deep. Azrael wasn't just another demon to hunt. He was an ancient force, something far more dangerous than anything I'd encountered before. As we stepped out into the cool night air, I glanced at Maeve. Her face was tight, her thoughts far away. What are you thinking? I asked, knowing her mind was already racing ahead to the next step. Maeve sighed, her breath visible in the cold. Nico's right. The longer this goes on, the worse it'll get. We can't just wait around for more bodies to turn up. We need to find whoever's doing this before the ritual's complete, I agreed, shoving my hands in my pockets as we walked. The problem is, we've got nothing to do except demonic runes and a couple of dead bodies. Maeve stopped walking, turning to face me. There's one place we haven't checked yet, the town's old records. I raised an eyebrow. Records? There are historical archives here. No matter how small, every town keeps track of its past, she explained. If a coven or a cult is operating here, chances are we'll find traces of them in the archives. I hated to admit it, but she was probably right. This town was old. Some buildings had been standing for over 200 years, and in a place like this, people didn't forget their history. Fine, I said. Where's the archive? Maeve smiled grimly. The town library. Great, a library. It wasn't exactly where I felt at home, but we didn't have much choice. The library was a relic from another time. A tall, stone building, it looked more like an old cathedral than a place where people came to check out books. As we approached, the windows were stained glass, casting eerie shadows on the pavement. A small plaque by the door read, Black Hollow Public Library, established 1874. Inside, the place was practically deserted. The smell of old paper and dust hung in the air, and the only sound was the soft clicking of the librarian's computer as she typed away behind the desk. She didn't even look up as we walked in. Maeve led the way, heading straight for the back of the library where the archives were kept. I followed, glancing around at the rows of bookshelves and wondering how many secrets this place held. You sure we'll find something here? I asked, keeping my voice low. Maeve nodded. Trust me, places like this have long memories. We reached the archive room, a small, dimly lit space filled with old filing cabinets and shelves stacked with ancient books. Maeve wasted no time, heading straight for one of the cabinets and pulling out a drawer filled with yellowed papers. I stood back, letting her do her thing. Maeve was in her element here. She sifted through the files with the focus I could never manage regarding research. Magic, rituals, the supernatural, that was her world. Mine was more about putting bullets in things. As she pulled out an old leather-bound book, Her eyes lit up. Here, this might be what we're looking for. I walked over and glancing at the book, I saw that it was covered in strange symbols, similar to the ones we'd seen on the bodies. What is it? I asked. It's a grimoire, she explained. An old one, from the 1800s, by the looks of it. This could be the key to understanding the ritual they're using to summon Azrael. Maeve opened the book carefully, flipping through the brittle pages until she found what she sought. Her finger traced a symbol on one of the pages that matched the carvings on the victims. This is it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The blood moon ritual. I frowned. Blood moon? Sounds dramatic. It is, Maeve replied, her eyes scanning the page. This ritual is ancient. It requires multiple sacrifices to channel enough power to summon a demon as powerful as Azrael. The blood moon is a symbol of rebirth, of power. Azrael will return if they complete the ritual during the next full moon. I swore under my breath. When's the next full moon? 3 days from now, Maeve said, her face grim. Perfect, I muttered. So we've got 3 days to stop a demon lord from rising and slaughtering the town. No pressure. Maeve didn't smile. She just closed the book and stood, her expression serious. We need to figure out who's behind this fast. We've already got a few suspects, I said, leaning against the wall. There's Nico, of course, but I don't think he's involved. He's too scared of Azrael to try something like this. Agreed, Maeve said. But what about the rest of the town? Anyone else who might have ties to the occult? I remembered the people we'd encountered since arriving in Black Hollow. The town seemed quiet on the surface, but shadows were always lurking beneath. The sheriff had been overly cautious about us getting involved. There was also Katarina Ward, the town historian, who seemed to know more than she was letting on. And then there was that uneasy feeling I'd had ever since we got here, like the town itself was watching us. There's something off about this place, I said slowly. Something, I can't put my finger on it. Like we're being watched. Maeve nodded, her expression distant. This town has secrets, old ones, and we need to uncover them before it's too late. We spent the next few hours combing through the archives, digging up everything we could find about Black Hollow's history. As it turned out, the town had more than its fair share of dark stories. There were reports of strange disappearances going back hundreds of years, people vanishing without a trace, only to turn up later as mutilated corpses. There were rumors of a coven that had once ruled the area, practicing dark magic and making pacts with demons. It all comes back to the coven, Maeve said, sitting cross-legged on the floor with several old books in front of her. The founders of Black Hollow. They were witches, practicing magic long before the town was built. I knelt beside her, glancing at the pages she'd marked. So what happened to them? They were wiped out, Maeve explained. The town's original settlers didn't take too kindly to their practices. They hunted them down, one by one, but before they were killed, the coven's leader cursed the town. Of course, I said with a sigh, there's always a curse. Maeve smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. The curse was meant to bring their magic back, to reclaim the town for the coven, but it never worked, until now. I frowned. You think someone's trying to complete the curse? Maeve nodded. It makes sense. The blood moon ritual could be part of the original curse. Whoever's behind this might be trying to finish what the coven started centuries ago. So we need to find them, I said, standing up, before they complete the ritual. Maeve stood as well, her expression determined. We will. As we left the library, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the town itself was suffocating under the weight of its secrets. I glanced up at the sky, where the moon hung low, veiled by clouds. 3 days. That was all we had. The walk back from the library was eerily quiet. Black Hollow had that strange silence that made your skin crawl, like the town was waiting for something, holding its breath. The air felt heavy, a weight pressing down on us. It wasn't just the approaching blood moon. Something darker was already creeping in. We should split up, Maeve said, as we reached the center of town. Split up? I repeated, glancing at her like she'd lost her mind. Maeve nodded, determined. We don't have time to waste. We need to cover more ground if the blood moon is in 3 days. I'll check out the old town records and see if I can find more details about the coven's descendants. You should go talk to Katerina Ward. She's the town historian. She might know more than she's letting on. Katerina? I rubbed the back of my neck, hesitating. I don't trust her. Maeve gave me a pointed look. Exactly. That's why you need to talk to her. I hated to admit it, but she had a point. Katerina had been slightly suspicious from the start, always skirting around questions about the town's past. She had to know something. All right, I agreed, but you watch your back. This town's not what it seems. Maeve gave me a tight smile. I always do. Katerina Ward's house was the kind of place that looked out of place, even in a town as old as Black Hollow. It was one of those Victorian-style homes with a wraparound porch, tall windows, and intricate woodwork that had seen better days. It was the kind of place that gave off serious don't come in vibes. But I'd dealt with worse. I knocked on the door, already feeling the weight of the building's atmosphere pressing down on me. A few moments later, the door creaked open, revealing Katerina standing in the doorway. She was in her early 40s, dressed in a long black dress, her hair tied up in a tight bun. Her sharp features and cold blue eyes made her look like someone who'd be more at home in a funeral parlor than in a small town like this. Detective Cross, she said, her voice smooth but distant. What brings you to my home? We need to talk, I said, stepping inside before she could protest. I wasn't about to waste time with pleasantries. You've been avoiding questions about the town's history, and I want to know why. Katerina closed the door behind me, her expression unreadable. I'm not avoiding anything. I simply don't have all the answers you're looking for. Funny, I said, eyeing the dusty old bookshelves lining the walls. You're the town's historian, yet you claim to know nothing about the coven that once lived here. Katerina's lips pressed into a thin line. Some histories are best left forgotten. That's not how this works, I said, stepping closer. People are dying, Katerina, and those deaths are tied to something old, something tied to Azrael. If you know anything that can help stop this, you need to tell me now. Her expression flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. She knew something. I could see it in her eyes, the fear, the hesitation. Azrael, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He's coming. Yeah, I gathered that, I said, steadying my tone. But I need to know why. Who's behind this? Why now? Katerina took a step back, her hands trembling slightly. It's the curse of the coven. They were betrayed by the town centuries ago, hunted down and slaughtered. But before they died, they made a pact with Azrael. I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of pact? Katerina hesitated again, then finally spoke, her voice trembling. The blood moon. It's a time of power, a time when the barrier between worlds is weakest. The coven's leader, Alara, made a pact with Azrael to return to the blood moon. In exchange for their souls, Azrael would grant them eternal life and vengeance. And now someone's trying to complete that pact, I said, the pieces clicking into place. Who? Katerina's eyes flickered with fear. I don't know. But the descendants of the coven still live in this town. If the ritual is completed, Azrael will rise again, and nothing will stop him. My jaw clenched. We were running out of time. You need to tell me who the descendants are. Before Katerina could answer, the lights flickered. A low rumble echoed through the house like a storm brewing beneath the surface. Katerina's eyes widened with fear, and she backed away, her hands trembling. No, she whispered. It's too late. A deafening crash came from the second floor, followed by the sound of something heavy moving above us. My hand instinctively went to my gun, though I knew it wouldn't do much good against whatever was coming. Katerina, stay behind me, I ordered, stepping toward the stairs. She didn't need to be told twice. As I started up the stairs, my heart pounded in my chest. The air grew colder with each step, and I could feel something watching me, something dark and ancient. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched before me, shrouded in shadows. I stepped forward cautiously, my hand hovering over my weapon. At the end of the hall, there was a half-open door, light spilling out from the crack beneath it. I pushed the door open slowly, revealing a large room filled with strange, occult symbols drawn on the floor and walls. And in the center of the room, standing over a makeshift altar, was a figure cloaked in darkness. Katerina? I called, but the figure didn't move. I stepped closer, my flashlight cutting through the dim light. The figure turned, and my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't Katerina, it was Nico. "What the hell are you doing?" I growled, my hand moving to my gun. Nico looked at me with his red eyes, but there was something different about him now. His face was twisted with pain, and his hands were shaking as he held a dagger, blood dripping from the blade. I tried to stop it," he gasped, his voice hoarse. "But I was too late. It's already begun." "What's already begun?" I demanded, stepping forward. Nico let out a choked laugh. "The blood moon. The ritual. It's unstoppable now. Azrael's coming." The floor beneath us rumbled, and the symbols on the walls began to glow with an eerie red light. Nico dropped the dagger, collapsing to his knees. "I tried," he whispered, "but the curse, it's stronger than I thought." I stepped forward, grabbing him by the collar. "How do we stop it?" Nico's eyes met mine, filled with despair. "You can't." The whole house shook as the rumbling beneath us grew louder. I could feel the energy building in the air, thick and suffocating, like the entire town held its breath for the coming storm. "Nico, you better start talking," I snapped, dragging him to his feet. "Who's behind this? Why are you here?" Nico's face twisted in pain. "I told you, I tried to stop it. Katerina, she's one of the descendants. She started it, but she's not the only one." My mind raced. The descendants, the Coven's bloodline, still lived in Black Hollow, and Katerina was one of them. But there were others. "Who else?" I demanded. Nico shook his head, his voice trembling. "I don't know. I couldn't find them all. But it doesn't matter now. The ritual's already started. The blood moon is rising, and Azrael, he's coming for all of us." My heart pounded in my chest as I processed his words. 3 days. We had 3 days before the blood moon, and the ritual was already in motion. If we didn't find a way to stop it soon, Azrael would rise, and no one would survive. The ground beneath us continued to rumble, and the red glow of the symbols cast an eerie light across the room. My grip tightened on Nico's collar as I pulled him toward me, forcing him to meet my eyes. "There has to be a way to stop it," I growled. "Nothing's unstoppable, not even Azrael. We need to break the ritual before it completes." Nico groaned, his knees buckling beneath him as he stumbled against me. "The Oath Stone." I froze, the words hitting me like a freight train. The Oath Stone, a cursed artifact bound to the ritual itself. Destroying it could sever Azrael's connection to our world before he crossed over. "Where is it?" I demanded. Nico coughed, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. "It's hidden, in the old church." Of course it was. The old church was the place no one dared visit, not even the locals. It had been abandoned for decades after a series of unexplained deaths. I hadn't thought much of it then, but now it made sense. If the Oath Stone was there, the entire town had been feeding into Azrael's power for years without knowing it. "Katerina knew," Nico rasped. "She's the one who led us here. She was the key." I glanced over my shoulder at the dark stairwell behind me. I knew Katerina was involved, but I hadn't realized she'd been orchestrating the entire thing. She wasn't just a descendant, but a willing participant in bringing Azrael back. "We have to stop her," I muttered, releasing my grip on Nico and standing up. "Maeve's at the library. I need to find her." Nico collapsed back onto the floor, his eyes closing as he let out a ragged breath. "It's too late, Cross. You won't make it in time." "Watch me," I snapped, turning on my heel and running down the stairs. The house groaned around me as I sprinted outside, the wind whipping at my face. The sky above was dark, clouds swirling ominously as the moon began to rise. The blood moon. Time was running out. The streets were empty as I approached the library, my heart pounding. Every shadow felt alive, watching me, waiting to slip up. The town had changed since I'd arrived. Its essence seemed warped, twisted by the ritual already taking hold. I could feel it, like a heavy weight pressing down my shoulders. When I finally reached the library, I found Maeve hunched over one of the tables, surrounded by old books and scrolls. She didn't even look up when I stormed in. "Maeve," I called, my voice hoarse from running. "We need to go, now." She looked up, her eyes wide. "What's going on?" "It's Katerina," I said, catching my breath. "She's one of the descendants. She's been working with Nico to complete the ritual. But there's more. There's an Oath Stone. If we can find it and destroy it, we can stop Azrael from crossing over." Maeve stood up quickly, gathering her things. "Where is it?" "The old church," I replied, glancing at the clock on the wall. "We've got less than 3 days before the blood moon peaks. If we don't get to the stone before then. She didn't need me to finish that sentence. Maeve grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Then let's move. Chapter 8. The Oath Stone. The old church sat on the outskirts of town, hidden behind a thick veil of trees. It was crumbling, a relic of a long time, its once grand steeple now broken and decayed. The windows were shattered, and the wooden doors hung askew on their hinges. It looked like the place that had seen more than its fair share of horrors. Maeve and I stood at the edge of the clearing, staring up at the building. The air around us was tense, the wind howling through the trees like a warning. "Are you sure about this?" Maeve asked, her voice low. I nodded, gripping the hilt of the dagger I'd taken from Nico. "It's the only way." We moved cautiously toward the entrance, the floorboards creaking beneath our feet as we stepped inside. The church was even more decrepit than I'd imagined. Broken pews littered the floor, and the altar was cracked in half as if something had split it from the inside out. But it wasn't the state of the church that set me on edge. It was the feeling. The air was thick with dark energy, making your skin crawl and your breath catch in your throat. It felt like we were standing on the edge of something terrible, something ancient. "The Oathstone has to be here," Maeve whispered, eyes scanning the room. I moved toward the altar, my heart pounding in my chest. My footsteps echoed loudly in the space as I approached, and as I got closer, I could see something glinting beneath the rubble. There it was, the Oathstone. It was a small, jagged rock, no bigger than a fist, but it pulsed with a dark, malevolent energy. I could feel its power, even from a distance. This was the ritual's source, the anchor tying Azrael to our world. Maeve joined me at the altar, her eyes widening as she looked at the stone. "That's it. We have to destroy it." I nodded, pulling out the dagger. "Stand back." Maeve stepped away as I raised the blade, my hand shaking slightly. I could feel the stone resisting as if it knew what I was about to do. Sweat dripped down my forehead as I forced myself to focus, to block out the dark whispers that filled the air around me. And then, with all my strength, I brought the dagger down. The moment the blade touched the stone, a blinding light erupted, sending me flying backward. I hit the ground hard, gasping for air as the light burned through the room, consuming everything in its path. I heard Maeve scream my name, but I couldn't move. The light was too intense, too powerful. It felt like it was tearing me apart from the inside out. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. The light faded, and the room fell into a deafening silence. I forced myself to sit up, my head spinning. The Oathstone was gone, shattered into 1,000 pieces. But something was wrong. I could feel it. Maeve knelt beside me, her face pale. "Ethan." I followed her gaze, my blood turning to ice. Standing in the center of the room where the Oathstone had been was Katerina. Her eyes were glowing red, and her face was twisted with an unholy rage. "You should have stayed out of this, detective," she hissed, her voice no longer human. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at Katerina. She wasn't the same person I'd met earlier. Something had taken over her. A dark force, something older than time. I could feel the power radiating off her, the air around us crackling with energy. "Katerina, it's over," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The Oathstone is destroyed. Azrael can't come back." She laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the empty church. "You think you've won? You've done nothing but delay the inevitable." Maeve stepped forward, her hands glowing with magic. "We won't let you complete the ritual." Katerina's eyes flashed with anger. "You won't stop me. Azrael's power is already in motion. The blood moon is still rising, and with it, my master's return." Before I could react, Katerina raised her hand, and a wave of dark energy shot toward us. Maeve moved quickly, casting a shield around us just in time to deflect the attack, but its force sent us both stumbling back. "Katerina, you don't have to do this," I shouted, trying to get through to her. "This isn't you. This is Azrael's influence." She sneered, her face twisted with malice. "I've been waiting for this moment my whole life, detective. You can't stop what's already begun." Another blast of energy shot toward us. This time, Maeve wasn't fast enough. The force hit her square in the chest, sending her crashing into the wall. I heard her cry out in pain, but there was no time to help her. I had to stop Katerina. I grabbed the dagger and charged toward her, but Katerina was faster. She flicked her wrist, and I was lifted off my feet and slammed against the wall by an invisible force. My body screamed in pain as I struggled to move, but I couldn't. She had me pinned. "You should have stayed out of this," she hissed, stepping closer. "But now, you'll die just like the rest." I gritted my teeth, refusing to let the fear take over. "If I die, I'm taking you with me," Katerina smirked, raising her hand to finish me off. Chapter 10. A Light in the Darkness. Before Katerina could strike, a blinding light filled the room, cutting through the thick, oppressive darkness. The force that pinned me against the wall suddenly vanished, and I fell to the floor with a heavy thud. Dazed, I looked up, my vision still blurry from the light. Standing between Katerina and me was Maeve. Her entire body radiated with a shimmering aura, and her eyes glowed with a power I hadn't seen before. Pure and ancient magic flowed through her like a storm, wrapping around her in twisting tendrils of energy. "You won't have him," Maeve said, her voice echoing with the weight of something far older than us. Katerina's eyes narrowed, and she hissed like a cornered animal. "You're too late, witch. Azrael's power already flows through me. You cannot stop me now." Maeve raised her hand, and a beam of light shot from her fingertips, slamming into Katerina's chest. Katerina screamed in pain, her body convulsing as she tried to fight back. But Maeve was relentless, her magic surging forward like a tidal wave, pushing Katerina back step by step. I struggled to my feet, watching in awe as the two women clashed, their powers battling for control of the space around them. The church walls groaned and cracked under the pressure, and the air vibrated with energy. Maeve's magic swirled faster and faster, and I could see the strain on her face as she pushed Katerina back, forcing the dark energy to retreat. "You don't have to be his puppet," Maeve shouted over the roar of power. "You can still break free." Katerina's face was twisted with fury, and her voice was a guttural growl. "I was born for this. Azrael chose me." With a final desperate scream, Katerina unleashed a surge of dark energy, aiming it straight at Maeve. The two forces collided for a moment, and the room shook violently, the windows shattering in a burst of glass. Maeve gritted her teeth, pushing back with all her might, and slowly, inch by inch, the dark energy began to falter. "Katerina!" I shouted, stepping forward. "You can stop this! You're not beyond saving!" Her eyes flickered momentarily, and I saw something: fear, regret, maybe even doubt. But it was too late. With one final surge of power, Maeve's light overwhelmed Katerina's darkness. The energy ripped through the room, and Katerina let out a blood-curdling scream as the dark force inside her was torn away. Her body convulsed, and then with a deafening crack, the connection to Azrael snapped. Katerina crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Maeve stumbled, her glow fading as she collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily. I rushed to her side, my heart pounding in my chest. "Maeve, are you okay?" She nodded weakly, her face pale. I think so, but we need to act fast." I glanced over at Katerina's limp form. She wasn't dead, but she was out cold, the dark energy that had controlled her finally gone. The ritual had been interrupted, but I knew this wasn't over. The blood moon still hung heavy in the sky, and Azrael's influence lingered in the air like a shadow that wouldn't fade. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Maeve struggled to stand, leaning on me for support. "We need to destroy what's left of the ritual. The Oathstone is gone, but there's still a chance Azrael could cross over if the final sacrifice is made." I stared at her, confused. "Final sacrifice?" Maeve's eyes met mine, and my stomach dropped as I realized what she meant. Katerina wasn't the final sacrifice. I was. The realization hit me like a freight train. My mind raced as I processed Maeve's words, its weight sinking in. "You mean, it was never about the Oathstone?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Maeve shook her head, her expression grim. "The Oathstone was the key to opening the door, but the final act that would bring Azrael fully into this world requires the sacrifice of someone who disrupted the ritual, someone who tried to stop it." I swallowed hard. "Me." She nodded, her hand trembling as she reached for mine. "Ethan, I didn't realize it until now, but you've been marked since you stepped into Black Hollow." The room around us seemed to close in, the air growing heavier with each passing second. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I remembered the strange sensations throughout the investigation, the feeling of being watched, the whispers in the darkness. It had all been leading to this moment. "So what now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel panic clawing at the edges of my mind. Maeve squeezed my hand, her eyes filled with determination. "We still have a chance. We can break the connection before the blood moon peaks, but it won't be easy." I glanced over at Katerina, her body still motionless on the floor. "And what about her?" "She'll recover, but she won't have Azrael's power anymore," Maeve said, her voice soft. "She was a pawn, just like Nico." I nodded, my mind racing. Time was running out. The blood moon hung heavy in the sky, and I could feel the dark energy swirling around us, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. "We need to get to the center of the ritual," Maeve said, pulling me toward the broken altar. "This is where it started, and we'll end it." I followed her, my heart pounding in my chest. The altar had been cracked in half during the battle, but the symbols etched into the stone still glowed faintly with the remnants of Azrael's power. Maeve knelt beside the altar, placing her hands on the stone. Her fingers trembled as she chanted softly, her voice low and melodic. I watched as the symbols on the altar flickered, the glow growing weaker with each word she spoke. But then, just as I thought we were gaining ground, the room went cold. A deep rumbling laugh echoed through the space, sending a shiver down my spine. Azrael. The voice was unmistakable, a dark, ancient presence that filled the room with malice. "You think you can stop me?" the voice sneered, the shadows around us twisting and writhing as if they were alive. "The ritual is incomplete, but the blood moon rises. You cannot escape what is already in motion." I felt a cold hand wrap around my heart, squeezing tight. Maeve's chant faltered, and her eyes widened in fear as the darkness around us began to take shape. A figure emerged from the shadows, towering and imposing, its red eyes glowing with unholy fire. Azrael. Even in his incomplete form, the demon lord was a terrifying sight. His body was made of shadows, shifting and flickering like smoke, but the raw power he exuded was palpable. "You've failed, detective," Azrael said, his voice like gravel. "The final sacrifice is inevitable. I will have your soul." My hand instinctively went for my gun, even though I knew it was useless. Maeve reached out, grabbing my arm. "Ethan, no. You can't fight him." I gritted my teeth, frustration and fear swirling in my chest. "Then what the hell do we do?" Maeve stood, her face pale but resolute. "We need to sever the connection. The ritual is still tied to you, but we can break it before Azrael fully crosses over." Azrael's laugh echoed through the room again. "Foolish witch, you cannot sever what has already been bound." But Maeve wasn't listening. She turned to me, her eyes filled with determination. "Trust me." Before I could respond, she began chanting again, her voice stronger this time. The air around us crackled with energy as she raised her hands, drawing symbols in the air with her magic. Azrael snarled, his red eyes narrowing. "You think you can stop me? You are nothing but a child playing with powers beyond your comprehension." But Maeve didn't waver. She stepped closer to me, her voice growing louder, more insistent. I could feel the power building around us, the fabric of reality bending and twisting under the weight of her magic. Azrael roared, his shadowy form expanding, reaching out toward us. "I will not be denied." And then, with a final loud shout, Maeve slammed her hands down onto the altar. The world exploded into light. The light was blinding, pure, and searing, cutting through the darkness like a blade. I felt the air around me shatter, the weight of Azrael's presence lifting as the energy surged through the room. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The oppressive force that had filled the space was gone, replaced by a strange, almost peaceful calm. I blinked, my vision slowly returning as the light faded. The room was still. The symbols on the altar had disappeared, and the air felt lighter and cleaner. Azrael was gone. The oppressive presence that had filled the room moments ago had vanished completely. The air felt cleaner, and as if the very essence of the church had been freed from the darkness that had gripped it for so long. I let out a breath. I hadn't realized I was holding, and my heart was still pounding. Maeve was kneeling by the altar, her hands trembling, her face pale. I rushed to her side, grabbing her shoulders gently. "Maeve," I whispered, my voice shaky. "Are you okay?" She nodded, though her breath came in shallow gasps. I think we did it." I looked around, half expecting some remnant of Azrael's power lingering in the air. But there was nothing. just the remnants of the broken altar, the scattered dust, and the shattered glass on the floor. It was over, or at least, that's what I wanted to believe. I helped Maeve to her feet, supporting her weight as she steadied herself. "You were incredible," I said, unable to hide the admiration in my voice. I didn't think anyone could stand against Azrael like that. Maeve smiled weakly, her eyes glowing faintly with the residual power of the spell she'd cast. "I've had practice." We both turned to Katerina, who was still lying unconscious near the altar. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, but whatever dark influence had possessed her was gone. She was just a woman now, a victim of her own choices, manipulated by forces far beyond her control. "What do we do with her?" I asked, my voice low. Maeve stared at Katerina for a moment, her expression unreadable. "She's not a threat anymore, but she'll have to face what she's done. The blood she spilled, the lives she destroyed, that's on her." I nodded in agreement. Yes, Katerina had been a pawn, but she had chosen her path. The town's secrets, the dark rituals, the deaths, those would weigh on her soul for the rest of her life. Whether she would ever find redemption wasn't for me to decide. "We should get out of here," Maeve said, her voice tired. "There's nothing more we can do in this place." I glanced at the shattered altar one last time, feeling a strange finality. The curse had been broken, the oath stone destroyed, and Azrael had been driven back to wherever he'd come from. Black Hollow would heal, slowly, painfully, but it would survive. As Maeve and I made our way out of the church, the first rays of dawn began to break through the clouds. The blood moon was gone, replaced by morning's soft, golden light. The town, for all its scars and dark history, felt different now. Lighter. We walked silently, the weight of the past few days pressing down on us. There were still so many unanswered questions, still so much that could go wrong. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a chance to breathe, to move forward. "I couldn't have done this without you," I said, breaking the silence as we reached the forest's edge. Maeve smiled, though it was weary. "You underestimate yourself, Ethan. You've always had the strength to face this. You just needed someone to remind you." I chuckled softly. "Still, I wouldn't want to face a demon lord without you by my side." We stopped at the edge of the road, the town visible in the distance. It looked almost peaceful in the morning light, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Black Hollow would never be the same after this, and neither would we. "What now?" I asked, turning to Maeve. She looked out at the town, her expression thoughtful. "There are always more battles to fight. Azrael may be gone, but the forces that brought him here remain there. Dark magic doesn't disappear overnight." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep in my gut. "Then we stay ready." Maeve met my gaze, her eyes filled with quiet determination. Always. 2 weeks later, the town of Black Hollow had begun to heal. The police chalked the deaths up to a string of unfortunate accidents, and the few townsfolk who knew the truth remained silent, as they always had. The whispers of dark rituals and old curses faded into the background, swallowed by the routine of daily life. Katerina had been taken into custody, though she hadn't spoken a word since waking up in that old church. Whatever power had once controlled her was gone, leaving behind a broken woman. She was facing charges, but I had a feeling she wouldn't last long in prison. The weight of her guilt would do more damage than any sentence ever could. As for me, I'd packed up and left Black Hollow as soon as the authorities wrapped up their investigation. There was nothing left for me here. The case was closed, and the threat was dealt with, but the memories of what happened in that church would stick with me for a long time. Maeve and I had parted ways, though I knew it wasn't the last time I'd see her. People like us, we didn't get to walk away from the darkness so easily. The next threat, the next demon, the next curse, it was only a matter of time before it came knocking. And when it did, I'd be ready. The shadows may have retreated for now, but they never truly disappear. They linger, just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike again. But whatever comes next, I know one thing for sure. I'm not afraid anymore, because when the shadows come for me, I'll be there to meet them head on, and I won't be alone.